get that Wi-Fi back on. Yes, live on YouTube. Now let's get it live on Twitch as well. Doesn't game go live? So I'm going live to Twitch. And yes, all right. All right. I'm now live. And hello, Lynn. Good to see you here too. Oh my. It is quite a mess tonight. I'm sorry, everyone. Quite a mess indeed. I probably should just get a new computer. My computer has been a bother with this at times. Sorry time instead of... I wrote sorry time instead of story time. That's, well, strange that it happened like that because it is kind of true. But anyway, sorry for all the technical difficulties this evening. I'll have to see what I can do about that and try to fix it for tomorrow evening. In the meantime, welcome everyone to Storytime. So I am live on Facebook, I'm live on YouTube and Twitch. So if you're watching from Facebook, welcome. If you're watching from YouTube, you're welcome. If you're watching from Twitch, welcome. Whichever way you're watching, if you would like to watch in one of the other ones, I'll give you the information. Facebook, I think you have to be my Facebook friend. Maybe, maybe not. If you join the Facebook group Storytime, ! At the end, you should be able to see these videos and you should get invites whenever they happen through Facebook. If you'd like to view on YouTube, just follow my YouTube page, hit like and like all the videos and hit subscribe to that little subscribe button. My channel is B Pokorny1, B P as in Price, OKORNY, the number 1. And then if you'd like to follow along on Twitch, well, my name on Twitch is Brett Doesn't Game, BRETT Doesn't Game, no apostrophes or anything like that. Anyway, now that we've gotten all that over with, thank you for those of you who are here. If you would like a shout out, please simply leave a comment. And hello, Nick. Glad to see you have jumped into the YouTube video there. Glad you're here. Good to see you. Yes, there's our man. Anyway, let us jump in. The reason I was late getting started tonight is because I am making homemade tiramisu tonight, and I just really lost track of time. I had to fix some things for work, take care of a few extra things for work, and then I tiramisu, and like I said, time just got away from me. And I see Bryce has joined in. Hello, how are you? Anyway, yes, all right. So yes, making that tiramisu, it's still not quite done yet. I still have a few more steps to go. But that's okay. I figured I could step away for a little more. So once again, a thank you to my friend Nick Hoffenberg for letting me know that I was late. He was asking me to if there was going to be a story time tonight. I was like, oh no, because it was 10:22 when he asked, and I realized I can't believe I completely forgot. I sat here watching The Office and making tiramisu, and time just slipped away from me. But here we are. And hello there, Amber. Glad you have joined as well. And sure, I can post pictures of the tiramisu later. But anyway, let us get on with it. Let's get on with story time. Don't forget, join the Facebook group. Like and subscribe to my channel on YouTube. I'll jump back a paragraph or two so we know where we left off. 3 days had passed since the warden had scratched Mr. Sir. Every time Mr. Sir delivered water, he poured Stanley's straight onto the ground. Fortunately, Mr. Pendanski delivered the water more often than Mr. Sir. Mr. Pendanski was obviously aware of what Mr. Sir was doing, because he always gave Stanley a little extra. He'd fill Stanley's canteen, then let Stanley take a long drink, then top it off for him. It helped, too, that Zero was digging some of Stanley's hole for him, although, as Stanley had expected, the other boys didn't like to see Stanley sitting around while they were working. Personal slave. When he tried pointing out that he was the one who took the blame for the sunflower seeds, the other boys said it was his fault because he was the one who spilled them. I risked my life for those seeds, Magnet had said, and all I got was one lousy handful. Stanley said, the white boy sits around while the black boy does all the work. Ain't that right, caveman? No, that's not right, Stanley replied. No, it ain't right, X-Ray agreed. It ain't right at all. Stanley dug out another shovelful of dirt. He knew X-Ray wouldn't have been talking like that if he was the one teaching Zero to read. Then X-Ray would be talking about how important it was that he got his rest, right? So he could be a better teacher, right? And that was true. He did need to save his strength so he could be a better teacher, although Zero was a quick learner. Sometimes, in fact, Stanley hoped the warden was watching them with her secret cameras and microphones, so she'd know that Zero wasn't as stupid as everyone thought. From across the lake, he could see the approaching dust cloud. He took a drink from his canteen, then waited to see who was driving the truck. The swelling on Mr. Sir's face had gone down, but it was still a little puffy. There had been 3 scratch marks down his cheek. 2 of the marks had faded, but the middle scratch must have been the deepest because it still remained. It was a jagged purple line running from below his eye to below his mouth, like a tattoo of a scar. Stanley waited in line, then handed him his canteen. Mr. Sir held it up to his ear and shook it. He smiled at the switch sound. Stanley hoped he wouldn't dump it out. To his surprise, Mr. Sir held the canteen under the stream of water and filled it. "Wait here," he said. Still holding Stanley's canteen, Mr. Sir walked past him, then went around the side of the truck and into the cab where he couldn't be seen. "What's he doing in there?" asked Zero. "I wish I knew," said Stanley. A short while later, Mr. Sir came out of the truck and handed Stanley his canteen. It was still full. "Thank you, Mr. Sir." Mr. Sir smiled at him. "What are you waiting for?" he asked. "Drink up." He popped some sunflower seeds into his mouth, chewed and spit out the shells. Stanley was afraid to drink. He hated to think what kind of vile substance Mr. Sir might have put in it. He brought the canteen back to his hole. For a long time, he left it beside his hole as he continued to dig. Then, when he was so thirsty that he could hardly stand it any more, he unscrewed the cap, turned the canteen over, and poured it all out onto the dirt. He was afraid that if he'd waited another second, he might have taken a drink. After Stanley taught Zero the final 6 letters of the alphabet, he taught him to write his name. Capital Z-E-R-O. Zero wrote the letters as Stanley said them. "Zero," he said, looking at his piece of paper. His smile was too big for his face. Stanley watched him write it over and over again. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. In a way, it made him sad. He couldn't help but think that 100 times 0 was still nothing. "You know, that's not my real name," Zero said as they headed to the rec room for dinner. "Well, yeah," Stanley said. "I guess I knew that." He had never really been sure. "Everyone's always called me Zero, even before I came here." "Oh, okay. My real name is Hector." "Hector," Stanley repeated. "Hector Zeroni." After 20 years, Kate Barlow returned to Green Lake. It was a place where nobody would ever find her, a ghost town on a ghost lake. The peach trees had all died, but there were a couple of small oak trees still growing by an old abandoned cabin. The cabin used to be on the eastern shore of the lake. Now the edge of the lake was over 5 miles away, and it was little more than a small pond full of dirty water. She lived in the cabin. Sometimes she could hear Sam's voice, "Onions." She knew she was crazy. She knew she'd been crazy for the last 20 years. "Hello, Sarah. Glad you joined." Mm. "Oh, Sam," she would say, speaking into the vast emptiness. "I know it is hot, but I feel so very cold. My hands are cold, my feet are cold, my face is cold, my heart is cold." Poor kissing Kate, everything so cold. And hello to Carla as well. Minecraft and story time. Gotta love it. Yes, where were we? Oh, yes, there we are. She'd been living in the cabin about 3 months when she was awakened one morning by someone kicking open the cabin door. She opened her eyes to see the blurry end of a rifle 2 inches from her nose. She could smell Trout Walker's dirty feet. "You've got exactly 10 seconds to tell me where you've hidden your loot," said Trout, "or else I'll blow your head off." She yawned. A red-headed woman was there with Trout. Kate could see her rummaging through the cabin, dumping drawers and knocking things from the shelves of the cabinets. The woman came to her. "Where is it?" she demanded. "Linda Miller?" asked Kate. "Is that you?" Linda Miller had been in the 4th grade when Kate Barlow was still a teacher. "There is no loot," said Kate. "Don't give me that," shouted Trent. "From here to Houston. You better tell him," but it's all gone. It dried up with the lake, the peach trees, the livestock. I kept thinking, it has to rain soon. The drought can't last forever, but it just keeps getting hotter and hotter and hotter." Her eyes fixed on the shovel, which was leaning up against the fireplace. "She's buried it," she declared. "I don't know what you're talking about," said Kate. There was a loud blast as Trout fired his rifle just above her head. The window behind her shattered. "Where is it buried?" he demanded. "Go ahead and kill me, Trout," said Kate. "But I sure hope you like to dig, 'cause you're going to be digging for a long time. It's a big, vast wasteland out there. You and your children and their children can dig for 100 years, and you'll never find it." Linda grabbed Kate's hair and jerked her head back. "Oh, we're not going to kill you," she said. "By the time we're finished with you, you're going to wish you were dead." "Yes, and I'm glad you're here as well." "I've been wishing I was dead for the last 20 years, said Kate. They dragged her out of bed and pushed her outside. She wore blue silk pajamas, her turquoise-studded black boots ruined beside her bed. They loosely tied her legs together so she could walk, but she couldn't run. They made her walk barefoot on the hard ground. They wouldn't let her stop walking. "Not until you take us to the loot," said Trout. Linda hit Kate on the back of her legs with a shovel. "You're going to take us to it sooner or later, so you might as well make it sooner." She walked one way, then the other, until her feet were black and blistered. Whenever she stopped, Linda whacked her with the shovel. "I'm losing my patience," warned Trout. She felt the jab into her back. "And good to have you, and thank you for joining in. You made it just in time." "Get up," ordered Linda. Kate struggled to her feet. "We're being easy on you today," said Trout. "It's just will you take us to it?" "Look out!" shouted Linda. A lizard leapt toward them. Kate could see its big red eyes. Linda tried to hit it with the shovel, and Trout shot at it, but they both missed. The lizard landed. Sharp black teeth bit into her leg. Its white tongue lapped up the droplets. Kate smiled. There was nothing they could do to her anymore. "Start digging," she said. "Where is it?" Linda screeched. "Where'd you bury it?" Trout demanded. Kate Barlow died laughing. Oh my, dear readers. Oh my. And now we enter part 2. Well, that's what it says here. Part 2, the last hope. I'm lagging. Oh no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Amber, if I'm lagging. I don't know what I can do. My internet and my computer have been acting up tonight, so I will do my best to just continue and hope that the lag doesn't get any worse. Yes, okay. So, continuing on with the story. There was a change in the weather, for the worse. The air became unbearably humid. Stanley was drenched in sweat. Beads of moisture ran down the handle of his shovel. It was almost as if the temperature had gotten so hot that the air itself was sweating. A loud boom of thunder echoed across seconds before the flash of lightning and the clap of thunder. That was how far away the storm was. Sound travels a great distance across a barren. I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does. Yes, good deal. "Come on, Rain," shouted Armpit. "Blow this way." Usually, Stanley couldn't see the mountains at this time of day. The only time they were visible was just at sunup, before the air became hazy. Now, however, the sky was very visible. The sky was very dark off to the west, and every time the lightning flashed, the dark shape of the mountains would appear briefly. "Come on, Rain," shouted Armpit. "Blow this way." "Maybe it'll rain so hard it'll fill up the whole lake," said Squid. "We can go swimming." 40 days and 40 nights, said X-Ray. "Guess we better start building us an ark. Get two of each animal, right?" "Right," said Zigzag. "2 rattlesnakes, 2 scorpions, 2 yellow-spotted lizards." The humidity, or maybe the electricity in the air, had made Zigzag more wild-looking. His frizzy blonde hair stuck almost straight out. The horizon lit up with a huge web of lightning. In that split second, Stanley thought he saw an unusual rock formation on top of one of the mountain peaks. The peak looked to him exactly like a giant fist with a thumb sticking straight up. Then it was gone, and Stanley wasn't sure whether he'd seen it or not. "I found refuge on God's thumb." That was what his great-grandfather had supposedly said after Kate Barlow had robbed him and left him stranded in the desert. No one ever knew what he meant by that. He was delirious when he had said it. But how could he live for 3 weeks without food or water? Stanley had asked his father. I don't know. I wasn't there, replied his father. I wasn't born yet. My father wasn't born yet. My grandmother, your great-grandmother, was a nurse in the hospital where they treated him. He'd always talked about how she'd dab his forehead with a cool, wet cloth. He said that's why he fell in love with her. No, he just blamed his no-good pig-stealing father. The storm moved off farther west, along with any hope of rain, but the image of the fist and thumb remained in Stanley's head, although instead of lightning flashing behind the thumb, in Stanley's mind, the lightning was coming out of the thumb as if it were the thumb of God. The next day was Zigzag's birthday, or line just in front of Squid. Squid told him to go to the end of the line. Hey, it's my birthday, Zigzag said, staying where he was. It's not your birthday, said Magnet, who was standing behind Squid. He didn't know what day of the week it was, let alone the date. Could have been July 8th, but how would Zigzag know? He tried to figure out how long he'd been at Camp Green Lake, if indeed it was July 8th. I came here on May 24th, he said aloud, so that means I've been here 46 days, said Zero. Stanley was still trying to remember how many days there were in May and June. He looked at Zero. He learned not to doubt him when it came to the math. 46 days felt more like 1,000. He didn't dig a hole that first day, and he hadn't dug one yet today. That meant he'd dug 44 holes. If it really was July 8th, as Mr. Sir gave it to him. Stanley dug his shovel into the dirt. Hole number 45. The 45th hole is the hardest, he said to himself. But that wasn't really true, and he knew it. He was a lot stronger than when he first arrived. His body had adjusted somewhat to the heat and harsh conditions. Mr. Sir was no longer depriving him of water. After having to get by on less water for a week or so, Stanley now felt like he had all the water he could want. Of course, it helped that Zero dug some of his hole for him each day, but that wasn't as great as everyone thought it was. He always felt awkward while Zero was digging his hole, unsure of what to do with himself. Usually he stood around a while before sitting off by himself, or on the hard ground, with the sun beating down on him. It was better than digging, but not a lot better. When the sun came up a couple hours later, Stanley looked for the thumb of God. The mountains were little more than dark shadows on the horizon. He thought he could make a spot where the top of the mountain seemed to jut upward, but it didn't seem very impressive. A short time later, the mountains were no longer visible, hidden behind the glare of the sun, reflecting off the dirty air. It was possible, he realized, that he was somewhere near where Kate Barlow had robbed his great-grandfather. It was If that was really her lipstick tube he'd found, then she must have lived somewhere around here. Zero took his turn before the lunch break. Stanley climbed out of his hole, and Zero climbed down into it. Hey, caveman, said Zigzag, you should get a whip. Then if your slave doesn't dig fast enough, you can crack it across his back. He's not my slave, said Stanley. We have a deal, that's all. A good deal for you, said Zigzag. It was Zero's idea, not mine. Don't you know, Zig, said X-Ray, coming over. Caveman's doing Zero a big favor. Zero likes to dig holes. He sure is a nice guy to let Zero dig his hole for him, said Squid. Well, what about me, said Armpit. I like to dig holes too. Can I dig for you, Caveman, after Zero's finished? The other boys laughed. No, I want to, said Zigzag. It's my birthday. Stanley tried his best to ignore them. Zigzag kept at it. Come on, Caveman. Be a pal. Let me dig your hole. Stanley smiled, as if it were all a big joke. Mr. Pendanski arrived with water and lunch. Zigzag offered Stanley his place in line. Since you're so much better than me. Stanley remained where he was. I didn't say I was You're insulting him, Zig, said X-Ray. Why should Caveman take your place when he deserves to be at the very front? He's better than all of us, said Stanley. No, it's not okay, said X-Ray. Get up here. Stanley hesitated. Well, this is a first, Mr. Pendanski said, coming around the side of the truck. He filled Stanley's canteen and handed him a sack lunch. Stanley was glad to get away. He sat down between his hole and Zero's. He was glad that he'd been digging his own hole for the rest of the day. Maybe the other boys would leave him alone. Maybe he shouldn't let Zero dig his hole for him anymore, but he needed to save his energy to be a good teacher. He bit into his sandwich, which contained some kind of meat and cheese mixture that came in a can. Just about everything at Green Lake came in a can. The supply truck came once a month. He glanced up to see Zigzag and Squid walk toward him. "I'll give you my cookie if you let me dig your hole," said Zigzag. Squid laughed. "Here, take my cookie," said Zigzag, holding it out for him. "No thanks," said Stanley. "Come on, take my cookie," said Zigzag, sticking it in his face. "Leave me alone," said Stanley. "Please eat my cookie," said Zigzag, holding it under Stanley's nose. Squid laughed. Stanley pushed it away. Zigzag pushed him back. "Don't push me." "I didn't." Stanley got to his feet. He looked around. Mr. Pendanski was in Zero's canteen. Zigzag pushed him again. "I said, don't push me." Stanley took a step backward, carefully avoiding Zero's hole. Zigzag kept after him. He shoved Stanley and said, "Quit pushing." "Lay off," said Armpit as he, Magnet, and X-Ray joined them. "Why should he?" snapped X-Ray. "Caveman's bigger. He can take care of himself." "I don't want any trouble," Stanley said. Zigzag pushed him hard. "Eat my cookie," he said. Stanley was glad to see Mr. Pendanski coming toward them along with Zero. "Hi, Mom," said Armpit. "We were just fooling around." "I saw what was going on," Mr. Pendanski said. He turned to Stanley. "Go ahead, Stanley," he said. "Hit him back. You're bigger." Stanley stared at Mr. Pendanski in astonishment. "Teach the bully a lesson," said Mr. Pendanski. Zigzag hit Stanley on the shoulder with his open hand. "Teach me a lesson," he challenged. Stanley made a feeble attempt to punch Zigzag. Then he felt a flurry of fists against his head and neck. Zigzag had hold of his collar with one hand and was hitting him with the other. The collar ripped and Stanley fell backward onto the dirt. "That's enough," Mr. Pendanski yelled. It wasn't enough for Zigzag. He jumped on top of Stanley. "Stop!" shouted Mr. Pendanski. The side of Stanley's face was pressed flat against the dirt. He tried to protect himself, but Zigzag's fist slammed off his arms and pounded his face into the ground. All he could do was wait for it to be over. Then, suddenly, Zigzag was off of him. Stanley managed to look up, and he saw that Zero had his arms around Zigzag's long neck. Zigzag made a gagging sound as he desperately tried to pry Zero's arms off of him. "You're going to kill him!" shouted Mr. Pendanski. Zero kept squeezing. Armpit charged into them, freeing Zigzag from Zero's chokehold. The three boys fell to the ground in different directions. Mr. Pendanski fired his pistol into the air. Oh, yes, I should have opened the window. It's a nice night. The other councillors came running from the office, the tents, or out on the lake. From the office, the tents, or out on, and walked over from her cabin. "There was a riot," Mr. Pendanski told her. "Zero almost strangled Ricky." The warden looked at Zigzag, who was still stretching and massaging his neck. Then she turned her attention to Stanley, who was obviously in the worst condition. "What happened to you?" "Nothing. It wasn't a riot." "Ziggy was beating up Caveman," said Armpit. "Then Zero started choking Zigzag, and I had to pull Zero off of Zigzag. It was all over before Mum fired his gun." "They just got a little hot, that's all," said X-Ray. "You know how it is, in the sun all day. People get hot, right? But everything's cool now." "I see," said the warden. She turned to Zigzag. "What's the matter? Did you get a puppy for your birthday? Didn't you get a puppy for your birthday?" "Zig's just a little hot," said X-Ray. "Out in the sun all day. You know how it is. The blood starts to boil." "Is that what happened, Zigzag?" asked the warden. "Yeah," said Zigzag. "Like X-Ray say, working so hard in the hot sun while Caveman just sits around doing nothing. My blood boiled." "Excuse me," said the warden. "Caveman digs his holes just like everybody else." Zigzag shrugged. "Sometimes." "Excuse me?" "Zero's been digging part of Caveman's hole every day," said Squid. The warden looked from Squid to Stanley to Zero. "I'm teaching him to read and write," said Stanley. "It's sort of a trade. The hole still asked. Doesn't that build character more than digging holes?" "That's his character," said the warden. "What about your character?" Stanley raised and lowered one shoulder. The warden turned to Zero. "Well, Zero, what have you learned so far?" "And hello, Mum, I see you joined." Zero said nothing. "Have you just been digging Caveman's hole for nothing?" the warden asked him. "He likes to dig holes," said Mr. Pendanski. "Tell me what you learned yesterday," said the warden. "Surely you can remember that." Zero said nothing. Mr. Pendanski laughed. He picked up a shovel and said, "You might as well try to teach this shovel to read. It's got more brains than Zero." "The at sound," said Zero. "The at sound," repeated the warden. "Well, then tell me, what does CAT spell?" Zero glanced around uneasily. Stanley knew he knew the answer. Zero just didn't like answering questions. "Cat," Zero said. Mr. Pendanski clapped his hands. "Bravo, bravo. The boy's a genius." "FAT?" asked the warden. Zero thought for a moment. Stanley hadn't taught him the F sound yet. Either. Zero concentrated hard and said, "Chat." All the councillors laughed. "He's a genius, all right," said Mr. Pendanski. "He's so stupid he doesn't even know he's stupid." Stanley had only thought about it, he'd realized it was very logical for Zero to think that the letter H made the CH sound. Okay, from now on, I don't want anyone digging anyone else's hole, said the warden, and no more reading lessons. I'm not digging another hole, said Zero. Are you? I guess not, they mumbled, although he knew they weren't digging just to learn a lesson. She was looking for something that belonged to Kissing Kate Barlow. Why can't I dig my own hole but still teach Zero to read? He asked. What's wrong with that? I'll tell you what's wrong with that, the warden said. It leads to trouble. Zero almost killed Zigzag. It causes him stress, said Mr. Pendanski. I know you mean well, Stanley, but face it, Zero's too stupid to learn to read. That's what makes his marched across Mr. Pendanski's face. His knees crumpled beneath him. He was unconscious before he hit the ground. The councillors all drew their guns. Zero held the shovel out in front of him as if he were going to try to bat away the bullets. I hate digging holes, he said. Then he slowly backed away. Don't shoot him, said the warden. He can't go anywhere. The last thing we need is an investigation. Zero kept backing up, out past the cluster of holes the boys had been digging, then farther and farther out onto the lake. And hello, Shay! Good to see you here. He's going to have to come back for water, the warden said. Stanley noticed Zero's canteen lying on the ground near his hole. A couple of the councillors helped Mr. Pendanski to his feet and into the truck. The warden ordered the councillors to take turns guarding the shower room and rec room all day and all night. They were not going to let Zero drink any water. When he returned, he was to be brought directly to her. She examined her fingernails and said, It's almost time for me to paint my nails again. Before she left, she told the 6 for me to call you and refer to you is the end of Holes Part 6 and the end of story time for the evening. We will pick up Holes again next Tuesday. And tomorrow we will resume with Bram Stoker's Dracula. On the weekend, we will pick up with more Russian fairy tales, as well as some original stories. So I do hope you all enjoyed it tonight. Oh, good, I thought it was my phone. Okay, it's better than those. Tomorrow night. I'll see what I can do. And yes, I'm sorry, Amber. I'm leaving for the night. I have to finish making my tiramisu. Ah, yes, and then it gets to sit overnight and become delicious. So yes, it'll be wonderful. So anyway, sorry, yes, I do have to go, but I will be on tomorrow night, and I should be on time tomorrow night. So good night, everyone. Thank you again for joining. Don't forget, if you're not already, join the group on Facebook. Storytime, exclamation point at the end. If you haven't already, like my videos on YouTube and hit that subscribe button. And if you would like to join on Twitch as well, if you have a Twitch, you can find me there, my one word. So thank you again, everyone. Much love to all of you. I appreciate you being here, and have a wonderful night. Please go ahead and have yourselves a wonderful night. Thank you again. Much love. Until next time, I bid you adieu.